Good morning. So this is ECO415, Development and Growth 1. I think this is our 6th lecture. So today we are going to look at international dependency theories. Okay, and this is section 3.4 from your textbook. So let's look at the outline of today's lecture. So first, we're going to talk about the neocolonial dependence model. So as the name suggests, this is about the extension of colonial relationships of the earlier centuries to today's world. And the main thesis, of course, is that former colony countries are still dependent on their colonial powers, the countries that colonized these lands. Then there is also this thing called false paradigm model. This model suggests that some countries are given the incorrect development recipes, incorrect development policies by the central force of global capitalism. So, so in a sense, the paradigm they follow, given these dependency relationships, are not correct, are not good for solving their development problems. Then also there is this thing called dualistic development, and dualistic development is a much more milder in argument, so it is not that radical, but it says inequalities basically. So basically it says in an economy, in a developing or underdeveloped economy, the signs of development and signs of underdevelopment can coexist. So for instance, if you look at different regions, you see a region or a city where incomes are high, education system is there, and health investments are there. But in some other regions, those regions could still be characterized by, underdevelopment. Or if you look at different sections of society, if you look at, for instance, people with different education levels, you see a small group of people that are highly educated, perhaps abroad, but then you also see a large mass of people who remain uneducated. Okay, so things like that. So those dualities are important in shaping why those things such as poverty, inequality, etc., persist in the long run. And at the end of the lecture, after talking about these three approaches, we're going to discuss some conclusions and some implications. Okay. Now, this neocolonial dependence model, as I said before I started recording, is about it's closely related with Marxist thinking. Okay, so these theories understand underdevelopment as a result of international capitalist accumulation system. Okay, so there are rich countries and there are poor countries, and the idea is that rich countries use their powers, political powers, economic powers, international relationships, etc., and they keep basically exploiting the poor countries. Okay, so that's the central idea of this thinking, and as a result, since rich countries remain powerful and poor countries remain powerless, then this unequal relationship continues. And then rich countries get richer and poor countries get poorer or remain poor in time. Okay. Now, to understand this, of course, there are different conceptualizations, and one very useful conceptualization is difference between center countries and periphery countries. Türkçesiyle merkez ve çevre ülkeler. So the center countries are developed countries of today, okay, that are powerful, rich, educated, with health systems and high urbanization rates, etc. Okay, so you can, for instance, you can imagine the center countries as most of the OECD countries or G7 countries. If you look at the top, top section of the core of the center. In fact, there are approaches that says, okay, there's center countries and there's the periphery of the center. Okay, so center can be further classified into two sets of countries. Again, the center of the center, such as G7 countries, right, and the periphery of the center, the countries that are still rich and powerful, but not as powerful as the center of the center. Okay, and then there's the periphery, right? And the periphery countries, again, could be decomposed into two further classifications. One would be the center of the periphery, right? Center of the periphery would mean developing countries that exhibit some fast growth or that exhibit more signs of independent development. All right. I mean, you may imagine, for instance, if I need to put Turkey in one of these classes, I would put Turkey as the center of the periphery, right? Because Turkey, I mean, Mexico is another example, perhaps. So those countries are still showing some successes, but they are still not the power of the center, a part of the center. And then there is the periphery of periphery, right? So in that fourth class, we see countries that are poor, that remain poor, and that have almost no power, no economic or political power in the global capitalism. All right. So then, of course, we understand poor nations would want to be, of course, self-reliant and independent, but because of the existing power relationships, because of the existing trade relationships, because of the existing capital flow relationships, capital inflows and capital outflows relationships, because of many other sources that we will discuss in a moment, this process of becoming self-reliant and independent and a developed country is sometimes difficult and sometimes impossible. Okay, so this is the idea. So basically, capitalism is a global thing, and still powerful groups and powerful countries. So powerful groups in the powerful countries still exploit for their own benefit the powerless people in powerless countries. Okay, so that's the notion. So again, if you look at income categories, for instance, if you look at the World Bank categories, for instance, or United Nations categories, you can divide these countries, into different classifications of centers and peripheries, right? Or you can look at things such as education levels. Okay, you can look at things such as trade relationships. So if you want to categorize countries into centers and peripheries, center of the center, periphery of the center, center of the periphery, and periphery of the periphery, you can use different statistics and different historical arguments, obviously, to put countries into that order. One interesting thing is this. Again, I observed as a result of my field experience. For instance, in Morocco, as you know, they're former French colony. They still have very strong trade ties with French companies. Okay, very strong ties, because most of the fresh fruits and vegetables are transferred to Europe from Morocco, of course, as exports, and most of them eventually end up in France. Why? Then the question, of course, why and how the French companies have strong ties, of course, importing French companies we are talking about here, have strong ties in Morocco, but not in, for instance, Turkey, right? So then you can understand, well, perhaps this is about colonial dependence, right? Because perhaps, of course, there is this language issue as well, because French is an official language in Morocco. But then, if you look at such historical examples, you try to understand. Yes, it is about some historical dependency here. There are path dependency across these dimensions. So if a country wants to export its primary products, such as fruit, fresh fruits and vegetables, then what are the where is the capital, and who owns this capital in Morocco that facilitate that type of trade? And if you look at this data, you see that French companies have strong relationships with the Moroccan farmers, for instance. Okay, and of course the Moroccan state as well. Independence theory, comprador groups. So that's the concept here. Comprador groups. They're important. They define as the local elites, okay, who act as fronts of foreign investors, and they kind of help them, and of course benefit from it, right? So they become part of the exploiting group, right? So again, if you think about Moroccan example, you may imagine that there are some local elites in Morocco, in Casablanca, in Rabat, in Marrakesh, for instance. And those local elites are powerful agents, possibly landlords, okay, or possibly some people that have very close ties with the king. So they use their economic and political powers to become the agents of these global powers, okay, in Morocco itself. So if this is a trade relationship, then it's trade. If it is tourism, then it is tourism. So basically, they become part of the center in this sense. Okay, so you may not just imagine, okay, there's a developed economy which is the center, and there's this underdeveloped economy which is in the periphery, and the relationship is basically monolithic. No, that relationship is still depend on social classes. Okay, so you may still imagine that poor workers in France are still exploited by the mechanisms of global capitalism. But then the situation is also similar in Morocco, because in Morocco there are landless people. There are some peasants, some workers that that experience very hard conditions in terms of income and etc. So in such a sense, these comprador groups are becoming the part of the center, because center is the exploitative part. Okay, center is where the powerful countries and powerful people basically a part of. Okay. Now, who are these? If you want to be more specific, as you see, we have several types of people in this comprador category. Landlords, entrepreneurs, military rulers, merchants, salaried public officials, trade union leaders. Again, how do we discriminate these people in a given country where they have high incomes, high social status, and high political power compared to workers or landless peasants? Again, so this is not to say that if you're an entrepreneur in a developing economy, then you become part of the comprador group. No, you have to have, of course, this, relationships. But for instance, we have trade union leaders here. So in many countries, you see that those are elites themselves, and they enjoy good lives. Some public officials, yes, of course. For instance, you know Kızılay, right? Some of the managers, high-ranked managers of Kızılay, for instance, have very large salaries, thousands of Turkish liras. Okay, many thousands of Turkish liras. Imagine military rulers. So military dictatorships are very common, of course, in underdeveloped world, especially in Africa and Latin America. So if you imagine military rulers, if I get successful in a coup d'état in a country, suppose that I am the military ruler, then I start enjoying high political power because I basically become the manager of the country, become the dictator. And then, of course, I start thinking about, oh, wait, my country has, let's say, gold. My country has some crops such as wheat and corn. Then I start thinking about, okay, how can I benefit from this? I mean, not just my country, of course. I may care about my country because now I am the ruler, so I have to feed the people at least, right? But then I may imagine, okay, how can I benefit from this from the system on my behalf as the individual? All right. Then I start recruiting people. Of course, first recruiting my security, because now I should be secure. I should be guarded against people's riots and other stuff. And then I start thinking about, okay, some agents could be there so that they can sell my country's gold to Belgium, okay, or to United States. So then you think about understanding how the comprador groups actually organize. In most of the time, this organization is, of course, self-explanatory, because if there's a capitalist system there, then people are free to accumulate wealth, and more powerful people, more politically powerful people, of course, accumulate more wealth, and they keep, according to these theories, of course, they keep exploiting the workers. So there are some interesting studies if you look at the literature, if you do some Google Scholar searches, depending on your interest, obviously. These political connectedness is still very important, not in underdeveloped or developing world, but also in developed world. Okay, there are very interesting studies, especially for Italian firms. There is one very famous Turkish economist, Ufuk Akçiğit, from the University of Chicago. You can check some of the stuff Ufuk Hoca works on. He has a paper about Italian firms who have some connections with the municipality leaders. Okay, when there's a local election, depending on these firms' relationships with these municipalities, then some firms expand more, some firms basically de-invest and get smaller, etc. So political connectedness, I mean, don't just imagine that political connectedness and the the adverse effects of such corrupt practices and violating the rule of law, etc., is part of the underdeveloped world. No, it's not the case. Even in the developed world, you can see examples like these. So at the end, again, this is all about domination and dependency, right? So not just the comprador groups, though, but there are global agents within this system. So if we talk about a global capitalism, right, then we should also be talking about not just countries, but other agents in the system. And some of these agents are multinational corporations, obviously. Okay, because if you look at the data, you see many multinational corporations that operate in many different countries. Okay, for instance, at some point, people in the Western Europe and North America, they realized that um, some of the consumer products, including electronics and sports equipment, for instance, that's a famous case. Some of these sectors are creating adverse environmental effects, right? Because their output-based carbon dioxide emissions are huge. So they started imagine relocating their production plants in other countries. Okay, for instance, if you buy, a Nike T-shirt, for instance, it is possibly produced in Cambodia or in Indonesia or in India or somewhere like this. Okay. Now, what is going on here? Well, first of all, of course, let's look at the part. For instance, Converse. Converse is a particular clothing company in the United States. It's an American brand originally. So they realize land is cheaper in Cambodia. Labor is also cheaper. Okay, and the idea is that, okay, if I can basically establish a production plant in this country by making, of course, a fixed an investment with a possibly large fixed cost, at the end, since I can still design my clothes in, let's say, in my headquarters in New York City, by employing some design engineers and some managers and some office personnel, then I can still benefit from this in the long run. Why? Because knowledge can be easily transferred to Cambodia, right? If I complete the design in my New York City headquarters, I can still, almost without cost, transfer that design to my factory in Cambodia. And in Cambodia, again, labor is cheaper, land is cheaper, so I can benefit from having this scale, right? Because they're going to produce with large scale. Now, in such a situation, you start thinking about, okay, what's going on here? Because most of the revenue originating from this become an American revenue, right? American income through license fees, etc., etc. Even if there is a local Cambodian, let's say, capitalists who undertake some of the market risks, etc., most of the revenue is going to go back to the United States. So in such a situation, we are directly talking about the global division of labor, right? So highly educated, possibly American or Chinese designers are employed by this company Converse in the United States, in New York City, and they still get large benefits and a good salary, of course. But like 10,000 workers or at least 3,000, let's say, workers, those are Cambodian workers, and they work in Cambodia at a very low wage, a very low real wage, maybe, I don't know, maybe just enough to put them above the poverty cutoff, or maybe just below it. All right, and who's benefiting from this? Well, if there's a Cambodian agent who's the owner of this production plant, yes, he benefits from it, and also the landowner benefits from it, right? Because land is there now. There's this American company renting my land, but workers if you think about them, they are now exploited not just by the Cambodian wealth owners or Cambodian landowners, but also by this multinational corporation. Okay. We also have national bilateral aid agencies. All right. So some of these agencies are governmental, some of these are non-governmental, of course. There are many funds in the world right now, and sometimes you see exploitative relationships there, right? Because how many, how much money is going to be transferred as aid, and who is going to decide on the distribution of this aid money to people? So these are questions, and when you start asking these questions, of course, the answers depend on, again, political powers, networks, and economic relationships. All right. So it is not always the case that most of the aid goes to where it is intended, right? People benefit from this, so they break the cycle of poverty, so they break this vicious circle, and they become they reach a good standard of living. It's not the case. And if it was the case, historically, actually, we observe that most of the aid become expropriated by, again, local elites or people that are more powerful in that particular country. Especially if a country is corrupt, then it is very difficult to efficiently and effectively distribute such humanitarian aid. Okay. And now, of course, part of this global system is the institutions such as World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Maybe you heard this phrase, Washington Consensus. Next week, we're going to talk about Washington Consensus a bit more, but basically it is the neoliberal, growth and development thinking. And these two organizations are basically forerunners of this Washington Consensus, and it's called Washington Consensus because these organizations are, their headquarters are in Washington D.C. Okay, and also it of course depends on the rise of neoliberal agenda as an explicit political, and economic system in the United States, especially with the President Ronald Reagan. Okay, in 80s, and there's Margaret Thatcher in the UK as the Prime Minister, Iron Maiden. So those institutions play a large role, or at least they have played a large role, by offering some development policies that benefited these comprador groups, basically, and not the workers or the peasants. Okay, so again, next week we're gonna discuss a lot. We're gonna discuss these organizations' role in a much more specific manner. Yes, so I have about 3.5 minutes. So let me do not start talking about the false paradigm model, but we can, if you have some questions, we can talk about the neocolonial dependence. This is of course, this is a controversial theory. Since 1970s, there are many different contributions to this field. There are people that are, neo-Marxians, such as Paul Baran, Paul Suzy. There are other people. One important figure, and I assigned a reading in the system. So there's a particular reading, not from the textbook, but a separate article, and that's about Andre Gunder Frank. Andre Gunder Frank is an important theorist in this field, and there is also Immanuel Wallerstein, Wallerstein or Wallerstein, however you pronounce it. It doesn't really important. I think a couple of years ago he just died. He was also an important figure. Both Andre Gunder Frank and Immanuel Wallerstein are much more specifically focusing on what they call a world systems theory. Okay, so they basically understand world as an entire global capitalistic system, and within this system there are different agents with different functionalities and networks and the trade ties and the capital movements, etc. All these play important roles. So we can discuss your questions and comments. You can ask them now or after the break. You can ask your questions. So we still have time. We have a lot of time actually. So we can discuss these. Okay, let me now stop sharing. If you do not have any input, we're going to continue after the break. So let's say we're going to continue at 9:55, if that's okay for everybody.
Okay.
All right, then you think about the neocolonial dependence model during the break when you are having your coffee or tea, depending on your taste. Then after the break at 9:55, we start discussing. Okay, we start discussing. All right, I'm now ending this and seeing you at 9:55.